Hercule Poirot, The Secret of the Conductor's Baton Part 1. The concert that ended in silence. The rain fell with a delicate persistence upon the streets of London, as though the sky itself were practicing a melancholy rhythm. Outside the Grand Aurora Concert Hall, carriages and motor cars arrived in elegant succession, their occupants cloaked in silk, wool, and expectation. Music, after all, demanded reverence long before the first note was played. Inside, the hall glowed with golden light. Chandeliers shimmered like frozen fireworks above rows of crimson velvet seats. The audience murmured softly, voices blending into a gentle hum not unlike an orchestra tuning its instruments. In the third row, seated with immaculate posture and unmistakable dignity, sat Hercule Poirot. He adjusted his mustache with precise fingertips and surveyed the hall with faint approval. "Ah, mon ami," he murmured to Captain Hastings, who sat beside him. "Observe the symmetry, the balance. A concert hall, like a crime scene, reveals much before anything has even occurred." Hastings smiled indulgently. "Poirot, I think tonight we are here simply to enjoy the music." Poirot tilted his head. "One never simply enjoys, Hastings. One observes." The orchestra began to assemble upon the stage, violins glinting under the lights, cellists settling their instruments between their knees, the brass section polishing mouthpieces with nervous care. At the center of it all stood an empty podium. "The maestro is late," Hastings noted. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Yes, and lateness, my friend, is rarely without meaning." A ripple of anticipation passed through the audience as Maestro Julian Arkwright finally emerged from the wings. Tall, silver-haired, and severe, he carried himself with the authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. In his right hand he held his most prized possession, a slender ivory conductor's baton, delicately carved and capped with silver. Poirot's gaze fixed upon it instantly. "An interesting object," he said softly. "That baton has a history." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "You know it?" "I know of it. Crafted in Vienna nearly 40 years ago. Gifted to Arkwright after his triumphant debut. Rumor says it is hollow." "Hollow?" Poirot smiled thinly. "Yes, hollow things often hide secrets." The maestro mounted the podium. Silence descended like a held breath. Arkwright raised the baton. And then a sharp, discordant sound cut through the air. It was not music. It was the sound of something striking wood, followed by a gasp, a stumble, and a horrifying stillness. The baton slipped from Arkwright's fingers and clattered to the floor. The maestro collapsed. For one frozen second, the world refused to move. Then chaos erupted. Women screamed. Chairs scraped back. Musicians leapt to their feet. Several members of the orchestra rushed forward, while others stood paralyzed, instruments trembling in their hands. Poirot was already standing. "Mon Dieu," Hastings whispered. He's dead." Poirot finished quietly. Dr. Emerson, seated nearby, was summoned to the stage. After a brief examination, he rose solemnly. "There is nothing to be done," he announced. "Maestro Arkwright is deceased." A murmur swept through the hall. Shock, disbelief, fear. Poirot's eyes, however, were not on the body. They were on the baton. It lay near the podium, its ivory surface unmarred, innocent in appearance. Yet something about it disturbed Poirot deeply. "Captain Hastings," Poirot said, "do not move, but trust me." Poirot approached the stage just as security officials attempted to usher the audience out. He spoke calmly but firmly, his Belgian accent lending unexpected authority. "I am Hercule Poirot. I believe this death is not natural." One of the guards hesitated. "Sir, the doctor has confirmed death, not cause," Poirot interrupted. "Permit me one moment." Reluctantly, they allowed him closer. Poirot knelt beside the fallen maestro. There were no visible wounds, no blood, no sign of struggle. "A man in excellent health," Poirot murmured. Collapsing at the precise moment he raises his baton. He reached toward the baton, but stopped. Instead, he withdrew a handkerchief and used it to lift the object delicately. It felt heavier than expected. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Ah," he whispered, "just as I suspected." He examined the silver cap closely. Their almost invisible fine seam. Poirot straightened and turned to Hastings. "My friend," he said gravely, "this was no tragic coincidence." "You mean murder?" Hastings asked. Poirot nodded. "And the weapon," he continued, holding up the ivory baton, "was conducting more than music tonight." At that moment, Inspector Lionel Graves of Scotland Yard arrived, his expression thunderous. "Poirot," he said, recognizing him instantly. "I should have known." Poirot inclined his head politely. "Inspector." "A pleasure, though I wish it were under happier circumstances." Graves gestured toward the body. "Heart failure, most likely." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Most unlikely." He held out the baton. "This object contains a hidden mechanism. Possibly a needle. Possibly poison." Graves frowned. "That's a bold claim." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then let us open it and allow the truth to take the stage." As the inspector took the baton, the orchestra hall stood silent, its grandeur now tainted by death and uncertainty. Somewhere within that elegant instrument of control lay a secret one powerful enough to kill. And this, Poirot knew, was only the opening movement. Part 2. A Baton without a maestro, the Grand Aurora Concert Hall, once alive with promise and harmony, had become a cathedral of whispers. The audience had been dismissed, the doors locked, and a gray stillness now clung to the velvet curtains and polished wood like a lingering echo. The orchestra members waited in uneasy clusters, instruments abandoned on chairs, faces pale with shock. Above the stage lights, dust motes drifted. Indifferent to tragedy. Inspector Lionel Graves stood near the podium, the ivory baton resting in an evidence pouch in his gloved hand. He examined it with the practiced skepticism of a man who had seen too many theories collapse under daylight. "Poison in the conductor's baton," he muttered. "It sounds theatrical, Poirot." Poirot, standing a little apart, clasped his hands behind his back. His expression was serene, almost reverent, as though he were listening to music only he could hear. "Ah, Inspector," he said gently, "crime is often theatrical. Murderers have a flair for drama, especially those who believe themselves clever." Graves sighed. "We'll know more once the autopsy is done." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "But meanwhile, the little gray cells, they do not wait." He turned his attention to the orchestra. One by one, he studied them. The concertmaster with trembling fingers. The second violinist whose eyes darted constantly toward the wings. The cellist who sat rigid, jaw clenched. The oboist who wept quietly into her sleeve. Each reaction was a note in a larger composition. Poirot stepped forward. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said politely, "forgive this interruption. I know you are distressed, but I must ask you to remain a little longer. Maestro Arkwright's death requires clarity." A murmur of unease rippled through the group. Inspector Graves cleared his throat. "You'll all be questioned, individually." A tall man with a sharp nose and restless energy spoke up. "This is outrageous. We've done nothing wrong." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps not, monsieur. But music, like truth, is built from many parts. One false note can spoil the whole." The man flushed and fell silent. Poirot gestured toward the empty podium. "Maestro Arkwright stood here moments before his death. Who last handled the baton?" There was a pause. Then a woman stepped forward. "I did," she said. She was in her early 30s, with dark hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. Her eyes were steady, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor. "My name is Elena Moreau," she continued. "I am the assistant conductor. I handed Maestro Arkwright the baton just before he went on stage." Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "And where was the baton before that?" "In the green room." "In its case. Was the case locked?" "No." Poirot nodded. "Merci, mademoiselle." Inspector Graves made a note. "Anyone else?" A thin, severe-looking man raised his hand. "I saw the baton earlier this afternoon," he said. "During rehearsal? Your name?" Graves asked. "Victor Hall, principal violinist." Poirot's eyes flicked to him. "Did you touch it?" Holly hesitated. "Briefly. The maestro asked me to hand it to him." Poirot smiled faintly. Brief touches can be very important. Hawley bristled. Are you suggesting? I suggest nothing, Poirot interrupted softly. I observe. The questioning continued, but Poirot felt a growing certainty forming beneath the surface of the answers. Everyone had alibis. Everyone had reasons to be here. But motives were rarely so neatly presented. The body of Maestro Arkwright was carefully removed, and with it went the immediate shock. In its place settled something colder, fear. Poirot and Hastings stood near the edge of the stage as the hall emptied further. This is dreadful, Hastings said quietly. Poor man. Dead in front of hundreds. Poirot nodded. Yes, but also precise. Precise? The timing. The setting. This was meant to be seen. They were joined by Inspector Graves, who looked more thoughtful now than dismissive. The preliminary exam suggests poisoning, he admitted. Fast acting. Possibly delivered through a puncture. Poirot's mustache lifted slightly. And the baton? Graves hesitated. There is indeed a hidden compartment in the handle. A very fine needle mechanism. Ingenious, really. Ah, Poirot breathed. Then we are in agreement. Graves folded his arms. Not entirely. Knowing how he died doesn't tell us who killed him. Poirot smiled. No, but it tells us what kind of person could have done so. And what kind is that? One with patience. With access. With a taste for elegance. Graves snorted. You romanticize murder. Poirot's eyes hardened. Just a fraction. None. I understand it. They moved toward the green room, a modest space lined with mirrors and coat hooks. Arkwright's belongings remained as he had left them, a neatly folded coat, a leather briefcase, a small silver flask. Poirot examined the room carefully. No signs of struggle. Hastings observed. Of course not, Poirot replied. The weapon was persuasion, not force. He opened the briefcase. Inside were sheet music, correspondence, and a sealed envelope marked private. Poirot did not open it. Instead, he studied the handwriting, the pressure of the pen, the slight slant. A man under strain, he murmured. Strain? Graves repeated. Yes. You see this letter? Poirot gestured to one partially visible. It is a legal notice. From a former orchestra member. Graves leaned closer. You're guessing. Poirot smiled. None. I read. Graves frowned but said nothing. At that moment, Elena Moreau appeared at the doorway. Inspector, she said, may I retrieve my coat? Graves nodded, watching her closely. As she stepped inside, Poirot observed her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes flicked instinctively to the baton case on the table, now empty. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Mademoiselle Moreau, he said casually, you worked closely with Maestro Arkwright, yes? Yes, she replied. For 5 years. And you admired him? She hesitated. As a musician. Poirot nodded. And as a man? A pause. Too long. He was demanding, she said carefully. Demanding men often create enemies, Poirot said. Or devotion. She met his eyes. Are you implying something, Monsieur Poirot? I am listening, he replied gently. She took her coat and left without another word. Hastings exhaled. That was tense. Yes, Poirot agreed. And revealing. They exited the green room as officers sealed it off. The night air outside was cool, the rain finally easing into a mist. So, Hastings asked, what do we know? Poirot clasped his hands. We know the baton was altered well in advance. We know several people had access. We know the murder was public, symbolic, almost ceremonial. And we know Maestro Arkwright was not universally loved. Inspector Graves joined them again. The orchestra is suspended until further notice. Everyone stays in London. Poirot nodded. Excellent, excellent. Graves repeated. Yes, Poirot said softly. Because the killer is still playing, and the next movement is already written. He glanced back at the concert hall. Its lights dimmed, its silence heavy. A baton without a maestro, Poirot continued, creates confusion, but also opportunity. Hastings frowned. Opportunity for what? Poirot's eyes gleamed, for the truth to reveal itself. And somewhere, hidden among the musicians, the murderer listened, waiting for the next cue. Part 3. Poirot meets the orchestra morning light. Crept cautiously into the rehearsal wing of the Grand Aurora Concert Hall, as though uncertain it was welcome after the events of the previous night. The corridors smelled faintly of polished old wood and the lingering perfume of nervous anticipation. Music stands stood abandoned like soldiers after a lost battle. Hercule Poirot walked slowly, deliberately, his polished shoes making almost no sound. Captain Hastings followed, hands clasped behind his back, eyes alert. I never imagined, Hastings said quietly, that an orchestra could feel so threatening. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon ami, when harmony is broken, even violins may become weapons. Inspector Graves had arranged for Poirot to interview the orchestra members, individually in one of the smaller rehearsal rooms. It was a practical space, bare walls, upright piano in the corner, a single window overlooking the Thames. One chair for the interviewee, one for Poirot. Poirot insisted on conducting the interviews alone. People speak more freely, he explained, when they feel they are not being interrogated, but understood. Victor Hallé, principal violinist Victor Hallé, entered first. Tall, lean, impeccably dressed, even in distress. He carried his violin case as if it were a shield. Monsieur Hall, Poirot said pleasantly. Please sit. Hallé complied, crossing his legs tightly. I assume this will be brief. We are all exhausted. Poirot nodded. Naturally. Tell me, how long did you work with Maestro Arkwright? 8 years. And in those 8 years, were you content? Hale's jaw tightened. He was a genius. Poirot smiled. That is not what I asked. There was a pause. He was difficult, Hallé admitted. Controlling. Cruel at times. Cruel? Poirot echoed softly. He humiliated musicians in front of others. Careers were destroyed on a whim. And yours? Poirot asked gently. Hale's fingers tightened around the violin case. He threatened to replace me last season, yet you remained. Yes, because you love the orchestra, Poirot suggested. Hallé laughed bitterly. Or because I had nowhere else to go. Poirot nodded. Merci, monsieur. As Hallé rose to leave, Poirot added casually, Where were you yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock? Hallé hesitated. Practicing alone. Poirot inclined his head. Of course. Elena Moreau, assistant conductor Elena, entered next. She was composed, but Poirot noted the faint shadows beneath her eyes, signs of sleeplessness. Mademoiselle Moreau, Poirot said warmly, you are very young to hold such responsibility. She smiled thinly. Maestro Arkwright insisted on excellence. And demanded loyalty, Poirot added. Yes. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Did you love him? She stiffened. That is irrelevant. Poirot shook his head gently. In matters of murder, nothing is irrelevant. Her voice dropped. I admired him. Once, and later? Later, she said. I learned who he truly was. Poirot's eyes remained kind, but penetrating. Which was? A tyrant, she whispered. He stole ideas, took credit, crushed those who opposed him. And you? Poirot asked. She met his gaze steadily. He promised me the baton one day. Then he took it away. The baton, Poirot repeated softly. She frowned. I mean the position. Ah, Poirot said. Words are like notes. Small, but powerful. He stood. Merci, mademoiselle. As she turned to leave, Poirot spoke again. You looked at the baton case last night. She froze. I was shocked. Poirot nodded. Shock reveals instinct. She left without another word. Samuel Beckett, cellist. The cellist was older, his shoulders heavy with years and disappointment. He sat slowly, as if the chair itself were an accusation. Maestro Arkwright ruined my career, Beckett said before Poirot could ask anything. Poirot raised an eyebrow. That is a strong opening. He dismissed me once, publicly. I begged to return. And he allowed it? Yes, but only in the second row. Never solo. Poirot nodded. Humiliation is a powerful poison. Beckett laughed harshly. If you're suggesting I killed him, you're wrong. I suggest nothing, Poirot replied calmly. Tell me, where were you when the baton was last used in rehearsal? With the rest of the section. Always with others? Beckett hesitated. Yes, Poirot smiled faintly. Always is a dangerous word. Isabel Fournier. Oboist Isabel's eyes were red from crying. But there was something guarded beneath her grief. Maestro Arkwright sponsored my education, she said softly. I owe him everything. And yet, Poirot said gently, gratitude and resentment often share the same bed. She flinched. He was kind, she insisted. Mostly. Mostly, Poirot repeated. She lowered her gaze. He controlled my contracts. My travel, my life. Poirot nodded. A patron may become a jailer. When she left, Poirot sat back, fingers steepled. Patterns in the silence by midday. Poirot had spoken to every member of the orchestra. Each had a grievance. Each had access. Each carried a private wound inflicted by the maestro's demanding hand. Everyone hated him, Hastings said later as they walked along the river. No, Poirot corrected. Everyone feared him, and that's different? 'Tis different, Poirot replied. Hatred is loud. Fear is quiet. And quiet emotions plan. Inspector Graves joined them, his expression troubled. The lab confirmed it, he said. The needle inside the baton delivered a fast neurotoxin. Death within seconds. Poirot nodded. Elegant. Almost merciful. Someone modified that Baton weeks ago, Graves continued. It required craftsmanship. Poirot stopped walking. Craftsmanship, he repeated. Yes. Poirot's eyes brightened. Then our killer is not only emotional, but skilled. How do you know? Hastings asked. Poirot gestured back toward the concert hall. Musicians understand precision, timing, mechanisms. He paused. And one more thing. What's that? Graves asked. The baton was not meant for Maestro Arkwright alone. They both stared at him. Meaning? Graves pressed. Poirot's voice was quiet. Grave. The killer did not know who would conduct first. At that moment, a young constable hurried toward them. Inspector, he said urgently. We found something. In the hall? No, sir. In Maestro Arkwright's apartment. Poirot's mustache twitched with anticipation. Ah, he murmured. The past has begun to speak. They turned toward the waiting car, unaware that somewhere behind them, in the echoing corridors of the concert hall, a door closed softly, and someone smiled. Part 4. Secrets behind the symphony Maestro Julian Arkwright. This apartment stood on the upper floor of a narrow Edwardian building overlooking Bloomsbury Square. It was an address that spoke of respectability rather than extravagance, quiet, controlled, and carefully chosen. Much like the man himself. Poirot paused before entering, adjusting his gloves. Observe, Hastings, he said softly. Where a man lives tells as much as how he dies. Inside, the apartment was immaculate. Too immaculate. Books aligned with military precision, furniture polished to a dull shine, curtains drawn at identical lengths. There were no photographs on the walls, no family, no friends, no memories. Inspector Graves frowned. You'd think a famous conductor would have something personal. Poirot nodded. Yes, the absence is eloquent. A uniformed constable pointed toward the study. We found something in there, sir. The study was small but dense with paper. Sheet music stacked in labeled piles, correspondence filed by date, and a heavy oak desk dominating the center. On the desk lay an open drawer. Poirot approached it slowly. Inside were several envelopes bound together with twine. All were marked with the same word, written in a firm, unmistakable hand. CONFID Tile. Poirot picked one up, waited, then looked at Graves. Inspector, he said gently, these letters were not meant to be read, which is precisely why they must be. Graves sighed. Just don't say I encouraged you. Poirot untied the twine. The first letter was from a former orchestra member dismissed 5 years earlier. It was not a plea, nor an apology. It was a threat. You destroyed me. I will not remain silent. Poirot read on. There were others. Different hands. Different names. Yet all shared the same undertone: resentment, accusation, and a demand for silence to be purchased. "Blackmail," Hastings said quietly. Poirot nodded. "Oui, but not in the usual direction." "What do you mean?" "These people were not blackmailing Arkwright," Poirot explained. "They were warning him. He was the one who held the power." Graves frowned. "Power over what?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached deeper into the drawer and withdrew a slim notebook bound in black leather. Inside were meticulous entries. Dates, names, amounts. Payments. Double quotes. To whom? Hastings asked. Poirot scanned the list. His expression grew more serious with each page. "To orchestra members," he said. "To patrons. To critics. Bribes?" Graves suggested. "Control," Poirot corrected. Arkwright did not merely conduct music. He conducted lives. They moved deeper into the apartment. In the bedroom, Poirot noticed a locked wardrobe. The key lay hidden beneath a cufflink tray, too obvious for a careless man, too deliberate for coincidence. Inside the wardrobe were not clothes, but boxes. Poirot opened the first. Photographs spilled out. Some showed orchestra members in compromising situations. Others depicted private meetings, exchanges of envelopes, heated arguments. Every photograph was dated, labeled, catalogued. "Good Lord," Hastings breathed. "He was spying on them." Poirot's voice was calm, but edged with steel. "He was collecting insurance." Graves swore under his breath. "This changes everything." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "Now we understand the fear." They returned to the sitting room, where Poirot noticed something odd. A small display case on the mantelpiece. It was empty. "A missing object," Poirot murmured. "What should be there?" Hastings asked. Poirot examined the dust outline carefully. "Something long. Slender? The baton?" Graves asked. Poirot shook his head. "No, something older." He turned back to the desk and opened another drawer. Inside lay a single document, a contract. Poirot read it slowly, then smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Inspector," he said, "Maestro Arkwright was not merely a conductor. He was a thief." "A thief?" Graves echoed. "Yes, this contract," Poirot explained, "belongs to a composer long deceased. Arkwright claimed authorship on an unfinished symphony. He completed it, yes, but claimed full credit." "That's not illegal," Graves said. "Perhaps not," Poirot replied. "But this symphony made him famous. And the original composer's family received nothing." Hastings frowned. "What does this have to do with the murder?" Poirot closed the contract gently. "Everything," he said. "Because music, mon ami, is legacy." They left the apartment as evening fell, the sky darkening once more over London. Back at the concert hall, the orchestra members had been informed of the discoveries. The atmosphere had shifted. Shock had given way to anger. "He ruined us," Victor Halley said bitterly. "All of us." "He owned us," Samuel Beckett muttered. Elena Moreau said nothing. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. Poirot watched her carefully. "Mademoiselle Moreau," he said softly, "did you know about the photographs?" Her lips parted slightly. "Some of them? And the payments?" "Yes." "And the stolen symphony?" She closed her eyes. "Yes," Poirot nodded. "Then you knew the maestro's empire was built on silence." She looked at him sharply. "Are you accusing me?" Poirot smiled sadly. "Non, I am asking who broke the silence." At that moment, Inspector Graves received a message. His face tightened. "We've got a problem," he said. "What kind?" Hastings asked. "One of the orchestra members is missing." Poirot's eyes gleamed, sharp and focused. "Ah," he said quietly. "Then the symphony has entered its dangerous movement." He turned toward the darkened corridors of the concert hall. "Because when secrets are exposed," Poirot continued, "someone always tries to escape the final note." And somewhere in the shadows, footsteps echoed quick, deliberate. "Afraid." Part 5. The Baton's hidden message. The corridors of the Grand Aurora Concert Hall seemed longer at night, stretching into uneasy tunnels of shadow and echo. A single light flickered near the stage entrance. its faint hum underscoring the tension that had settled over the building. Inspector Graves strode ahead, his footsteps sharp against the polished floor. "The missing musician is Isabelle Fournier, the oboist," he said. "She didn't return to her hotel. Her room is untouched." Poirot followed calmly, his hands folded behind his back. "Fear makes people run," he said. "Guilt makes them hide. We must decide which music she is following." Hastings frowned. "You don't think she—" Poirot raised a finger. "I think nothing yet. I observe." They reached the stage, now empty, except for a single music stand left standing beneath a spotlight. The orchestra pit lay in darkness, like an open mouth waiting to speak. Poirot paused. "Inspector," he said softly, "where's the baton?" "In evidence," Graves replied. "Scotland Yard." Poirot nodded. "Good. Then let us hope it still has something to say." The baton reveals its secret at Scotland Yard's forensic laboratory. The ivory baton lay dismantled on a velvet-lined table. Its elegant simplicity had been stripped away, revealing a clever internal mechanism, a spring-loaded needle housed within a hollow shaft, triggered by pressure from the conductor's grip. But Poirot was not interested in the needle. He leaned closer, peering through a magnifying glass at the inner wall of the baton. "There," he murmured. "You see it?" Hastings squinted. "I see scratches." "Not scratches," Poirot corrected. "Engravings." The technician adjusted the light. Tiny symbols, almost microscopic, ran along the inner surface. Musical notation. Not notes to be played, but notes to be read. "A code," Graves said slowly. "Oui," Poirot replied. "A message hidden inside an instrument of control." Carefully, the technician photographed the markings. Poirot studied the images, his mind already working. "These are not random," he said. "They correspond to bar numbers. Specific passages." "From which piece?" Hastings asked. Poirot smiled. "From the symphony that made Julian Arkwright famous. The Stolen Symphony." A chill passed through the room. "You're saying the baton contained—" "A confession?" Graves asked. "A reminder," Poirot replied. "A threat, perhaps. Or insurance." They returned to the concert hall with renewed urgency. The missing oboist Isabelle Fournier was found shortly after midnight, not fleeing the city, but hiding within it. She was discovered in a small church near the river, seated alone in a pew, her oboe case clutched tightly in her lap. She did not resist when the officers approached. She only looked relieved. Poirot spoke to her privately. "I did not kill him," she said immediately, tears streaming down her face. "But I knew he would die." Poirot nodded gently. "Tell me." She took a shuddering breath. "Maestro Arkwright forced me to copy something. Years ago. A fragment of music. He said it was his." "And you recognized it later?" Poirot said softly. "Yes. It belonged to my teacher. The real composer. He died penniless." Poirot's eyes were kind, but sharp. "And the baton?" She swallowed. "I saw it weeks ago. Open. I saw the mechanism." "Who opened it?" She hesitated. "Elena Moreau." The betrayal Elena Moreau stood in the rehearsal room once more, but now the composure she once wore like armor had begun to crack. Her eyes burned with something deeper than fear. Poirot faced her alone. "You knew," he said quietly, "about the symphony, about the blackmail, about the baton." "Yes," she replied. "He taught me everything. Even how to kill?" She flinched. "No." Poirot tilted his head. "But you taught someone else how to use it." Silence fell between them. "He deserved to be exposed," Elena said finally. "But not murdered." "Yet you placed the baton in his hand," Poirot replied. "Yes," she whispered, "because I knew someone else had altered it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, then the murderer is neither the maestro, nor his assistant. Who then?" she demanded. Poirot straightened. "The one who understood both music and mechanisms. The one who had time and bitterness." She stared at him. "Victor Halle," she said softly. Poirot nodded. "The principal violinist," he said. "A man threatened with replacement. Skilled with his hands." present at every rehearsal, and desperate to end the maestro's control. Elena sank into a chair. He said it would only scare him, force him to confess. Poirot's voice hardened. But fear, like poison, is difficult to measure. A dangerous crescendo. Inspector Graves entered moments later. "Hale's gone," he said grimly. "Left his hotel an hour ago." Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Then we are near the finale," he said. "And it will not be quiet." Hastings swallowed. "What now?" Poirot looked toward the stage, where tomorrow night's empty podium still stood. "Tomorrow?" he said. "There will be another performance." Graves frowned. "By whom?" Poirot's mustache curved into a thin, knowing smile. "By the killer," he replied. "And this time, I shall conduct. Part 6. A murder in minor key." The announcement stunned everyone. "You will conduct?" Inspector Graves repeated. Disbelief etched across his face. Poirot nodded calmly. "Yes, nothing draws a murderer out of hiding like the promise of a perfect ending." Hastings looked alarmed. "Poirot, this is madness. You'll be standing where Arkwright died." Poirot adjusted his mustache. "Precisely, mon ami. The stage remembers. And so does the killer." The trap is set. The following evening, the Grand Aurora Concert Hall opened its doors once more. Officially, the performance was announced as a memorial rehearsal, attendance restricted to patrons, critics, and orchestra members only. Unofficially, Scotland Yard officers were positioned throughout the hall, dressed as ushers, musicians, even members of the cleaning staff. At center stage stood the podium, and upon it, resting in full view, was the conductor's baton. Not the original, of course. That lay safely locked away. This one was a perfect replica, identical in weight and appearance. Poirot insisted on it. "The murderer believes the baton is power," he explained. "So we give him power without danger." The orchestra assembled reluctantly. There was fear in their eyes, but also something else: anticipation. Everyone sensed that the truth was near. Victor Hale's chair remained empty. Poirot entered last, dressed immaculately. He mounted the podium with deliberate grace. For a moment, the hall seemed to hold its breath. Poirot lifted the baton, not to begin the music, but to speak. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said clearly, his voice carrying effortlessly. "We are here not to perform, but to remember." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Maestro Julian Arkwright was a man of brilliance, Poirot continued, but also of fear. He ruled through silence. And silence always ends in a scream. He lowered the baton. "Let us begin." The second attempt, the orchestra started softly. The opening movement of the Stolen Symphony, the same piece Arkwright had claimed as his own. The music flowed, mournful and restrained, filling the hall with unresolved tension. Poirot conducted gently, his movements precise, almost understated. Then dashed midway through the second movement, a sharp twang, a plong. Violin strings snapped. Victor Hall had appeared. He stood near the wings, instrument in hand, eyes fixed on the podium. Poirot did not turn. He felt it. The shift in the air, the tightening of intent. Moments later, Poirot's hand faltered, just slightly. To a trained eye, it was unmistakable. A signal. From the balcony above, something small and metallic dropped, glinting as it fell toward the stage. Hastings gasped. The object struck the podium, inches from Poirot's foot. A needle. The hall erupted. Officers surged forward as Victor Hall bolted toward the rear exit. Musicians cried out. Chairs overturned. Poirot stepped back calmly, raising a hand. "Mise Amos," he called. "Do not panic. The danger has passed." Graves was already in pursuit. The confession in the corridor. Victor Hall was cornered near the service corridor, his breath ragged, his face twisted with desperation. "I didn't mean to kill him," he shouted as officers restrained him. "It was supposed to be a warning." Poirot approached slowly. "You altered the baton," Poirot said quietly. "You hid the needle. You believed the pressure of his grip would only prick him." Hall laughed bitterly. "He controlled everything. Our futures. Our art. I wanted him to feel fear for once. And the code?" Poirot asked. "The musical engravings?" Hale's shoulders sagged. I put them there. A message. Proof. If I died, the truth would live inside the baton. Poirot nodded. You are a musician, monsieur. You understand that truth, once played, cannot be unheard. Hale's eyes filled with tears. He deserved to be exposed. Perhaps, Poirot said gently, but justice is not vengeance. Hawley looked at the floor. I saw you conduct, he said softly. You understood the music. Poirot inclined his head. Music speaks where words fail. After the silence, the hall slowly emptied. The orchestra members stood together, shaken but relieved. Elena Moreau watched as Hawley was taken away, her expression unreadable. You knew he would try again, she said to Poirot. Yes, Poirot replied. Because murderers who act for ideology always believe their ending must be witnessed. Inspector Graves approached. The case is essentially closed. Attempted murder, previous homicide. Poirot shook his head slightly. Almost? Almost? The symphony, Poirot said. It must be restored. Graves frowned. You mean legally? No, Poirot replied softly. Morally. He looked back at the stage, now empty once more. The final movement remains, Poirot said. And it belongs to the truth. Asterisk, asterisk, part 7. False notes and false alibis morning returned to London with a pale, uncertain light, as if the city itself were reluctant to face what the night had revealed. Newspapers lay scattered across cafes and doorsteps, their headlines heavy with scandal. Famed conductor poisoned. Orchestra secrets music murder mystery. Diane is inside a private room at Scotland Yard. The orchestra members sat together once more, no longer merely witnesses, but participants in a shared reckoning. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the table, hands clasped, eyes thoughtful. Madame and messieurs, he began, you have told the police your alibis. Today, you will tell me the truth. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Inspector Graves leaned against the wall, arms crossed. We know Hawley altered the baton, he said. What else is there? Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, Inspector. One criminal act rarely exists alone. It is usually accompanied by many small silences. The alibis begin to fracture. Poirot turned first to Samuel Beckett, the cellist. You told us you were never alone, Poirot said gently, that you were always with your section. Beckett shifted uneasily. That's right. Poirot produced a rehearsal schedule. Yet on 3 occasions, you left early. Each time, Maestro Arkwright recorded a private meeting with you. Beckett's face reddened. He forced me. Non, Poirot said softly. He threatened you. Beckett exhaled sharply. Yes, he had photographs. He said he'd ruin me. Did you know about the baton? Poirot asked. No, Beckett said quickly. I swear. Poirot nodded. I believe you. But you helped maintain the silence. Beckett lowered his head. Poirot moved on. Victor Hale's invisible partner. Victor Hawley did not act alone. Poirot said calmly. A murmur rippled through the room. He'd help, Poirot continued. Not in killing, but in hiding. Elena Moreau stiffened. Poirot turned to her. You believed Hawley wished only to frighten Arkwright, Poirot said. But you also ensured the baton reached his hand. Yes, she admitted quietly. I thought exposure would follow. Poirot nodded. You believed in justice, but you ignored danger. Elena met his gaze. And you, Monsieur Poirot? You risked your life to prove a point. Poirot smiled sadly. Touché. The patron in the shadows. Poirot's eyes then moved to a man seated at the far end of the table, a well-dressed gentleman with silver hair and an air of detachment. Sir Reginald Morton, Poirot said. Patron of the arts. Morton raised an eyebrow. Am I to be accused now? Not accused, Poirot replied. Understood. Poirot produced a ledger. You financed Maestro Arkwright's career. In return, he protected your investments. Morton stiffened. Perfectly legal. Until the stolen symphony, Poirot said. Silence fell. You knew, Poirot continued. And you paid for the silence of others. Morton's voice was cold. Art requires sacrifice. Poirot's eyes hardened. not murder. Inspector Graves straightened. Sir Reginald will be speaking later. Morton said nothing. The orchestra's unspoken pact. Poirot folded his hands. You see, he said, this was not one man's crime. It was a system. He walked slowly around the table. Each of you protected the maestro. Not out of love, but out of fear. And when Victor Hallé struck, none of you were surprised. Isabelle Fournier began to cry softly. We thought, she whispered, that if he fell, we'd all be free. Poirot stopped beside her. Freedom bought with silence, he said gently, is never freedom at all. A new truth emerges. Inspector Graves cleared his throat. The Crown will prosecute Hallé. Others may face charges of conspiracy or obstruction. Poirot nodded. As they should. Hastings leaned toward Poirot. Is that it, then? Poirot shook his head slowly. No, he said. There is still one false note. He turned to Elena once more. You removed something from Arkwright's apartment, Poirot said quietly. Her eyes widened. The missing object from the mantelpiece, Poirot continued. The original manuscript fragment? The room froze. Elena swallowed. He didn't deserve it. No, Poirot agreed. But neither do you. She reached into her bag and placed a folded sheaf of aged paper on the table. The symphony's true ending, she said softly. Written by the real composer. Poirot examined it reverently. Then, he said, the music may yet be redeemed. Toward the final movement as the meeting ended. Poirot stood alone by the window, watching the city stir. Hastings approached quietly. You look tired, old friend. Poirot smiled faintly. Justice is not a triumphant march, Hastings. It is a quiet correction. And now? Poirot turned back to the table, to the manuscript, to the shattered illusions. Now, he said, we prepare the final movement. Hastings frowned. There's more? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yes, because the truth has not yet been played. In public. And somewhere beyond the walls of Scotland Yard, the stolen symphony waited its final note unheard. Asterisk, Part 8. Poirot's little gray cells at work. The city buzzed with rumor and outrage. London's musical circles were in upheaval. Patrons withdrew support. Critics sharpened their pens, and the Grand Aurora Concert Hall stood on the brink of disgrace. Yet in a quiet room overlooking Hyde Park, Hercule Poirot sat serenely at a small table. A pot of tisane steaming gently beside him. Before him lay the fragile manuscript, the true ending of the symphony. Poirot read it not as a detective, but as a listener. He closed his eyes, imagining the music as it was meant to be, unresolved pain giving way to quiet dignity. Not triumph, but truth. Captain Hastings paced the room. You can't be serious, Poirot, he said. Another public concert? After everything? Poirot opened his eyes. Especially after everything. The plan. Inspector Graves arrived shortly thereafter, hat in hand. Skepticism written plainly on his face. You want permission to stage a performance, he said flatly, using a stolen symphony tied to an active murder case. Poirot smiled. I want permission to restore ownership. And you think this will help the investigation? Poirot leaned forward. Inspector, criminals fear two things, exposure and being forgotten. We shall offer neither. Graves sighed heavily. You really believe the truth will surface on stage? Poirot nodded. Music reveals what speech conceals. Reluctantly, permission was granted. The announcement went out the next day. A special performance, the Symphony in D minor, conducted by Hercule Poirot, featuring the orchestra of the Grand Aurora Concert Hall with a restored final movement. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Reactions in the shadows. Elena Moreau read the notice in silence. Her expression torn between fear and hope. Isabelle Fournier wept openly. Sir Reginald Morton cancelled his attendance. And Victor Hallé, awaiting trial, requested a radio in his cell. Poirot noticed everything. Rehearsal of truth. The rehearsal was tense, almost painful. The orchestra struggled not with technique, but with memory. Each note carried accusation. Each pause recalled silence. Poirot conducted gently, patiently. This is not about perfection. he told them. It is about honesty. He stopped them often, asking questions not about tempo, but about feeling. Where does this phrase hurt? Where does it forgive? Slowly, the music changed. Elena approached Poirot during a break. You're doing this for him, she said softly. The composer. Yes, Poirot replied. And for you? For me? You must decide, Poirot said, whether you wish to be remembered as his successor or his correction. She nodded, eyes glistening. The night before, on the eve of the performance, Poirot received an anonymous letter. Do not play the final movement. Hastings read it over his shoulder. A threat? Poirot smiled faintly. A confession, perhaps. Inspector Graves doubled security, yet Poirot slept peacefully. The little gray cells, as Poirot dressed the next evening. Hastings watched him carefully. You seem certain, Hastings said. But what if someone tries again? Poirot adjusted his tie. They will not. Why? Because, Poirot said softly, the killer's motive has already been exposed. What remains is not fear, but shame. Hastings frowned. You're relying on conscience? Poirot smiled. I rely on psychology. The hall fills once more. The Grand Aurora Concert Hall filled to capacity. Critics, musicians, patrons, and journalists alike sat shoulder to shoulder. Drawn by curiosity as much as by music, Poirot stepped onto the stage to restrained applause. He raised his baton, but before the first note, he turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, tonight you will hear a symphony that was incomplete for many years, not because the composer died, but because the truth was stolen. A hush fell. This final movement, Poirot continued, belongs to a man whose name was erased. Tonight, it is restored. From the balcony, a single figure rose abruptly. Sir Reginald Morton. Poirot's eyes met his. The trap was set. Asterisk. Part 9. The final rehearsal. The Grand Aurora Concert Hall was shrouded in anticipation. The audience sat in near silence, a palpable tension hanging in the air. The chandeliers gleamed, the velvet seats held their breath, and even the instruments seemed to wait. On stage, the orchestra was assembled, each musician visibly nervous. Their eyes flicked constantly toward Poirot, who stood at the podium, baton in hand, poised as though to conduct both music and truth. Hastings leaned toward him, whispering, Are you certain this will work? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Mon ami, certainty is the luxury of the foolish. We merely prepared the stage and allow human nature to perform. The opening notes, Poirot lifted the baton, and a soft, haunting melody filled the hall. The symphony began precisely as Arkwright had left it. Until the final movement, the restored portion breathed life like a hidden secret. The audience sat transfixed, unaware that every note was a clue, a subtle revelation. Poirot had arranged for moments of deliberate emphasis, pauses, slight hesitations, and crescendos to draw attention to hidden truths encoded in the music. From the balcony, Sir Reginald Morton shifted uncomfortably. He knew the significance of the restored movement. Every note was a reminder of payments made, promises broken, and stolen credit. Poirot's gaze occasionally flicked to the orchestra, noting subtle reactions. Elena Moreau's hands trembled slightly as she guided a particularly difficult phrase. Isabelle Fournier's expression softened as she realized her teacher's legacy was finally being honored. The trap tightens halfway through the final movement. Poirot lowered his baton briefly and addressed the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, some truths are hidden not by ignorance, but by willful secrecy. Tonight, justice will be heard not through words, but through music. From behind the curtains, a hush swept over the hall. Morton's face paled. Poirot had embedded in the music subtle gestures and symbols that revealed the sequence of crimes, how Halley had acted, how the baton was altered, and how payments and threats had orchestrated fear. It was as if every listener could now read the hidden narrative. And for Morton, each note was a knife twisting. The confrontation as the final chords rang. Poirot turned fully toward the audience and addressed Morton directly. Sir Reginald Morton, he said calmly, you finance not art, but oppression. You silence the voices of the living and the dead. Tonight, the symphony exposes all. Morton rose, his composure collapsing. "This is preposterous," he shouted. "I did nothing illegal." "Nothing illegal, perhaps," Poirot said softly, "but every silent accomplice bears responsibility. Fear is a cage, and you kept them imprisoned." The orchestra concluded the final note, lingering in perfect resonance. Silence fell like a weight. It was broken only by Morton's involuntary gasp. Eyes darting as officers quietly approached from the wings. Confessions and resolution. Victor Halle, who had been secretly brought in under police escort to witness the concert, felt the burden lift. The symphony itself had validated his desperate act. Elena Moreau approached Poirot afterward. "Monsieur Poirot, the music, it revealed everything." "Yes," he said, "but it also revealed mercy. Halle faces justice. Yes, but he acted against tyranny. That must be acknowledged." Inspector Graves stepped forward, guiding Morton into custody. "You will answer for your complicity," Graves said. Poirot's eyes softened. "And so the final movement is complete, not merely in music, but in truth." A quiet aftermath after the hall emptied. Hastings and Poirot lingered. The manuscript lay safely folded, ready to be returned to the composer's estate. Hastings shook his head. "I still can't believe you solved it this way." "A concert to catch a murderer." Poirot smiled, tapping his baton lightly. "Ah, Hastings, crime is often a dissonant note in life's symphony. Only when we conduct carefully can harmony be restored." Hastings laughed softly. "You really think the world can be set right with music?" Poirot looked out at the empty stage, the notes of the symphony still lingering in memory. "Not set right," he said, "but understood. And understanding is the beginning of justice." Part 10. Poirot conducts the truth. The morning after the symphony's final performance, London awoke to a world subtly altered. Headlines no longer merely spoke of murder and scandal. They celebrated resolution, courage, and the reclamation of truth. Stolen Symphony restored. Poirot's conduct brings justice. Orchestra's secrets are revealed. Poirot walked through the deserted streets toward the Grand Aurora Concert Hall one last time. The rain had returned, gentle and cleansing, like the city itself acknowledging closure. Captain Hastings followed, notebook in hand. Though there was little left to record, Poirot paused at the hall entrance, placing a gloved hand on the doorframe. "Ah, Hastings," he said, "how many lives are touched by a single baton?" Hastings shook his head. "Too many, I think. But justice prevailed, didn't it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. "Oui, but justice is subtle, my friend. It requires patience, observation, and the little gray cells." The orchestra reassembled inside the hall. The orchestra prepared for a symbolic rehearsal, their first without Arkwright, but also their first under true leadership. Elena Moreau stepped forward as assistant conductor, her expression both solemn and resolved. Isabelle Fournier arranged her sheet music, glancing at the podium with a mixture of reverence and relief. Poirot addressed the group. "Mes amis, you have survived fear, secrecy, and betrayal. But you have also survived yourselves. Tonight, the music is yours to claim, not the maestro's." A hush followed. The musicians exchanged quiet smiles. Even Samuel Beckett allowed himself a small nod, as if acknowledging that the weight of past humiliation had lifted. Halle and Morton. Victor Halle, escorted by police, had already confessed fully, his conscience eased by the symphony's exposure of the truth. No further crimes would befall the orchestra from his hand. Sir Reginald Morton, meanwhile, faced civil consequences for his financial manipulations and complicity in silencing the musicians. He had not committed the murder itself, but his shadowy influence had nurtured the conditions for it. Justice, Poirot knew, did not demand vengeance. It demanded recognition of wrongdoing. The baton and the manuscript. Poirot returned the ivory baton and the restored manuscript to the composer's estate, ensuring that the symphony's rightful ending would live beyond scandal. "Beyond death, objects are symbols," Poirot explained to Hastings. The baton was not merely a weapon. It was a messenger, a reminder, a record. And now it can rest. Hastings smiled faintly. "You always did see more than everyone else." Poirot adjusted his cravat. Ah, mon ami, that is why I am Hercule Poirot. Reflection that evening. Poirot and Hastings dined quietly at a small restaurant along the Thames. The events of the past weeks, the murder, the conspiracy, the hidden symphony felt almost dreamlike. Hastings raised a glass. To justice and to music. Poirot smiled, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. To justice, yes, but also to the truth that music can reveal and silence can conceal. Never forget, Hastings, that life itself is a composition and every note matters. Hastings nodded. And sometimes the smallest note, like a hidden engraving inside a baton, can change everything. Poirot's mustache twitched in quiet satisfaction. Precisely. And now, my friend, we may rest. Until the next dissonant note calls upon the little gray cells. Outside, the night deepened, London lights reflecting on the wet cobblestones. The symphony had ended. The criminals faced their reckoning. And Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, knew that peace-like music was often only temporary. But for now, the world was in harmony. End of part 10. The mystery concludes.